getting ready to share this with everyone else without permission. And again, just being mindful of some of the material that we may discuss is potentially sensitive. So we just ask for parental discretion if there are little ones running around or participating. So at your discretion, just be mindful of that. And then the last piece here is kind of related to the recordings of the webinar. So we are recording this, and just for kind of our purposes, and there is the potential it could be shared eventually. So we'll be making sure that we're being mindful of confidentiality related to sharing of stories and things like that. Obviously, we want to encourage some active participation, but just being mindful of kind of what's said in here is being recorded. So keeping that in mind as we go through. I think most people are pretty familiar with the Zoom platform, but if you do want to mute your lines, there is that button on the bottom left, I think, on your screens, and then sharing your video is also an option as well. So you can do that throughout the presentation. There is also the chat box. We'll be asking a few times throughout to throw a few items in that chat section there. I'm just opening it on my screen. It looks a little bit different when I'm sharing. So if there is anything that does come up, please feel free to either speak up or drop something into that chat box there. If no one has any questions related to that stuff, I'll move forward, and Jess, if you want to kind of go through a bit of the review from Monday and what we're getting into today.
Yeah, so on Monday we talked about what communication is and all of the different components that can come into that, and how simple communication is sometimes and how complicated it also can be. And I think it's really important to kind of review and acknowledge the fact that it doesn't matter what we're doing, we're communicating to those people around us in some way. So the examples I gave on Monday was, if I'm in a bad mood and I'm only giving you one-line answers, or I'm not talking at all, or I just really don't have that body language that is showing you that I'm happy and excited to be around you, that's communication in itself. So oftentimes when we do think about communication, we revert back to that verbal dialogue, but communication is so much more than that. There are so many different ways that we communicate. The verbal one we just talked about, but that really accounts for a very small portion of the messages that we try to send people. So as an example, I can say, "Hey Jackie, have a nice day," right? And that comes off very positive, very genuine, or I could be like, "Hey Jackie, have a nice day," right? So just even changing the tone of your voice, how fast it is, how slow it is, and kind of accentuating different words changes that entire message. So communication is so much more than what we say. And that example really had nothing to do with even body language, right? Like I could say, "Have a nice day," walk away and not make eye contact, really just kind of give her my back and keep going, and that's going to send a message in itself, right? So especially with what we're dealing with now, and a lot of us being isolated and away from other people, it's the video chats are great because you can get some of that body language in there, but the emails and texts, sometimes it's really hard to read what was going on, and that's why we felt it so important to do that pros and cons list that we went through on Monday, so that you can really pick the best platform for whatever it is that you need to say to get your messages across in ways that people receive it. And that's another key point too, is that we all receive messages differently. So the way I put out a message might not be the way that you receive it. So it's important to acknowledge those factors as well. So all of that said, some of the homework that we asked everyone to give a try are I statements and assertive communication, or what we like to call the desk script. So I know there's only a few of you back from Monday, and that's totally okay. But for those of you that are listening, did anyone try the I statements? I know I did a couple of times. And I found, particularly for me, I really struggled with remembering not to say the you statement first, and I had to come in with I and then own the way I felt about that situation. Was there anyone else that had any experience with that? You can either say it out loud or just put it in the chat box. Nobody? Jackie, did you get a chance to practice your I statements?
There we go. Sorry, it's a different screen, so I didn't know how to unmute myself. I did get to practice my I statements a little bit, and I was also in the same boat as you, Jess. I was having a very difficult time not kind of turning things around and being like, well, I feel like when you don't, like that was a challenge for me to kind of take it on with my feelings and emotions of the situation rather than pinning it on the one person in particular. So definitely comes with a lot of practice and trying to be a little bit more descriptive versus just immediately jumping to placing blame or kind of pointing someone out as the person at fault for the outcome of the situation. So it's definitely easier said than done, that's for sure.
We have a comment that says, I statements become very vulnerable. I agree with that, absolutely, because oftentimes, especially if there's conflict, and we're going to talk about conflict in just a little bit, but it makes you own your feelings, right? And that's part of the reason why I statements are so important, is because you do own your feelings and you're able to kind of put them out there. And it does put you in a vulnerable position, but it also puts you in a position to best deal with that conflict. So I think that's important to keep in mind too. Often people tend to argue with the you statements. And I think I gave the example earlier, like, you're lazy. Well, I'm not lazy. I do this, right? But when you say I feel, people can't really debate your feelings. They're yours and you own them, right? So coming out with that I statement and telling people how you feel, it is really important to that whole understanding piece of conflict, which we'll get into a little bit later today. What about the assertive script? So the desk script. So there was 4 components to that. There was describe, express, specify, and then give a consequence. So when we talked about describing, that's a particular event. So not a you always or not all the time. It's one particular situation, and you express how that made you feel. Then you specify what you need and then add a positive consequence. This is a completely awkward and unnatural tool to use. And I'm going to acknowledge that right off the hop. So for those of you that actually got an opportunity to put it into play, that's fantastic. I know I didn't really have any opportunities to kind of throw that script out there. But it is something I have used in the past, and I do find it to be quite effective in de-escalating any kind of conflict. Jackie, did you have any experience with that the last few days?
Unfortunately, I was kind of in the same boat as you. I didn't really get a chance to fully kind of dive into that a little bit more. But I do find that you can kind of pull some of the components, right, of that desk script into building those I statements, right? So the describing and expressing part, or describing and expressing part, for sure was kind of coming into play when I was trying to utilize those I statements a little bit more, and not necessarily getting fully to the consequences piece of that, but more so kind of trying to work through the process a little bit more together. And maybe we initially skipped the first or the last 2 steps there because we got to a good resolution. Kind of what we'll be going through a little bit today in terms of what some proper kind of effective communication procedures are. But again, it's not easy, and it does come with it does take a lot of practice, and it is going to feel very, very awkward. And that might be part of the reason why we didn't go through it as kind of step by step as we discussed in the class on Monday.
Yep. And I think before we move into some of today's topics, I think it's really important to emphasize that, you know, if you're on here taking a communications course and getting all these great tools and tips, you can't really expect that from the person you're communicating with, whether it's a coworker or a partner, if they are not getting the same material. So as an example, you might come out with this assertive desk script and ask to try it, and they might be like, what are you even trying to do to me right now? Right? So expect some of those reactions. And what we really encourage is, during a time where there's no conflict, make sure that you're introducing some of these things to say, hey, this is what I've been working on. This is what I want to show you. If there is a conflict moving forward, or if we have a disagreement and we need to communicate more effectively, could we kind of try this model. So that's just something to consider as well. Any other comments? I just seen one come in here. It threw the other person off. Yeah. So it's definitely a different type of script. And it does take so much practice to maintain those types of statements. And it's not and that's the thing. And what we wanted to emphasize when we were talking on Monday is that you have aggressive over here. Okay? You have passive over here. It's that assertive communication that is that tool that we have to continuously practice and continuously learn. So we're going to talk a little bit later about the difference between reacting and responding to situations. And the responding piece is where this assertive communication is going to come in and help you with that effectiveness. So for today, we're going to talk about dealing with conflict effectively. We're going to go through an interest-based communication model, and we're going to focus a little bit on active listening. What we say to someone is only 50% of that communication equation, and listening is so important. So we're going to take some time today to go through that. All right, next slide. So conflict's an interesting word. And actually for those of you that are listening right now, can you just type quickly in the chat box what first comes to mind when you think about the word conflict? What is conflict? What do you think of? Disagreement. Anything else? Battle? Yeah. Is conflict always a negative thing? Oh, someone negative, problem. Yeah. So it can be a problem. It can be a battle in some way, shape, or form. But I think it's important to remember, and because a few things that came up there were more on the negative end, that conflict can also be a very positive thing. And if you think about really any major event that has ever happened in history, there's definitely some form of a conflict interwoven in there as well, where a lot of good things have come out of that. So oftentimes we view conflict as negative, but it doesn't always have to be. It could be a struggle involving two or more parties resulting from really perceived differences in their values or interests in a situation. So that's that textbook definition. But really, any kind of disagreement would be that conflict piece, whether it's small or it's big. And the thing I really want to focus on here is that there's a lot of costs and benefits to conflict, right? So not just all negative, but definitely some positive. But the negative kind of costs to conflict can be quite big. Everything from relationship issues to financial issues. Maybe it has to do with job loss, those types of things, if conflict is not resolved effectively. And again, benefits can lead to more effective communication. It can better people's relationships, increase motivation, all of those types of things as well. You're going to notice that it says real or perceived differences. That perceived differences is a really big one. I find oftentimes when it comes to communication, we tend to assume things from other people. So we assume that they feel a certain way, and we then react based off of that assumption. So sometimes we can get quite far ahead of ourselves in a conflict that might not actually be a conflict. And that is why communication is so important moving forward. Jackie, anything to add to that?
No, I think you hit the nail on the head there, right? That we really can't have change unless there is some sort of conflict, right? And we'll get into that in a quick second here, of kind of the ways in which we choose to respond to that are going to be basically the dictator of if we're going to have positive or negative conflict. So we'll elaborate on that a little bit further here. Before we jump into that piece, it's kind of really important to ensure that in order to effectively manage our conflict, we kind of need to understand the major causes of kind of where it can be coming from, right? So generally speaking, there's 5 different kind of categories of conflict up here. Obviously, there can be a variety of different categories. This is kind of the generalization of where things tend to fall. And oftentimes you'll see examples that could potentially fall into one or more of these categories. So we'll just kind of go through them there pretty quickly. When we're talking about structural, this is kind of any part of the time when like a structure or a process is causing a conflict, right? So that could be limited resources, organizational structures, authority issues, those types of things. Those are kind of those bigger picture type institutional or structured issues that we don't necessarily agree with that could be causing conflict. When we talk about relationship, this is often caused by a breakdown in communication, right? Other examples of this could be past negative experiences, stereotypes that we potentially bring into personal relationships. If we have or have seen repeated negative behaviors, those types of things, when we're trying to either further or build a relationship in any capacity, if we're kind of holding on to these preconceived notions, these stereotypes, what we maybe experienced in the past, that can oftentimes influence how we choose to pursue the relationship and can sometimes cause the conflict to arise there because we're kind of holding on to a few things. When it comes to facts and data, this could be things like lack of information, misinformation, having too much information even sometimes, or the big one in here is that interpretation of that information, right? So this one is probably the easiest to rectify with effective communication, and 90% of the time, this is what causes conflict, right? Not having the right information or interpreting it in error, and that's what is going to kind of spark that conflict between parties. And the last one here before we talk about interest is values. So when we talk about values, these are really kind of the beliefs that people use to give meaning to their life, right? This is kind of what they choose to follow, and this is what their outlook on life looks like, right? They follow these values. We could throw ethics in here too, as to kind of the path in which they're choosing to follow in their life. Value conflicts often arise when there's someone who's trying to either push their values on you that you might not necessarily agree with, or there's a conflict between two parties that have very different kind of value sets, right? This could be things like having just or unjust legal systems, or right versus wrong, what basically you see as different from someone else when it comes to your personal values, and an imposition that's being kind of put in place related to those. So oftentimes, I'm sure we can kind of see how a few of these can kind of connect. So we usually see kind of relationship and values having a lot of similarities in that sense. And that's really kind of why that interest piece is at the middle of this table here, right? All of these are connected in some way, shape, or form to the interest that you kind of hold for your position on a certain topic area. So we're going to get into looking at interest in a quick minute here, but just keep in mind that really those interests that we hold so dear to us can influence all of these different kind of categories and can be really the root of why we might experience conflict. Being able to kind of understand these different categories is really that kind of first step in working towards, like I said, trying to find the root of what that conflict really is. We're going to get into kind of what we like to call our iceberg model here in a little bit, where there's only so much that's actually kind of above the water and so much more that we need to explore that's kind of below. And that's really what the essence of effective communication is digging into that deeper type information there. I will click forward and turn over to Jess.
All right, so whenever there is a conflict, we have two choices on how to deal with it. We can respond to it or we can react to it. And truthfully, personally, it took me a while to really grasp the differences between the two. And the one thing I want to mention is sometimes we don't have too much of a choice and we do have to react to situations, or it's our natural response to react to a situation. If that is to happen, and I'll explain that a little bit further, keep in mind that you can stop that reaction at any time, pull back, and then move towards more of that response. Oftentimes, let's start with reacting. We tend to react to situations when they're a little bit more closer to home, so to speak. So things that are very personal and very important to us, when they are threatened, when they are affected, it elicits that emotional response, right? So oftentimes this happens if you're unprepared and you tend to react more of that reflex, defensive, that you hurt me, I'm going to hurt you, or maybe you're scared of a situation and you need to get out of it very quickly. It's that natural, more fight or flight response that comes in without you taking the time to really process the consequences of what that reaction could look like. And I know most of us can relate to it because we've been in situations where maybe people have hurt us or made us angry, and we sit and think, this is what I want to do to them or say to them, but this is going to be a better response. Okay, and notice I said response, to help solve the actual problem that's going on, right? So maybe it's a conflict with your partner, maybe it's a coworker, any of those types of things, right? So typically we tend to mirror people's reactions. So if someone comes aggressively at us, oftentimes we respond with aggression, or sorry, react with aggression. Same thing is true for any of those more emotional responses. Maybe it's not anger, maybe it's sadness or something like that. So sometimes we can mirror the people around us. And if we can move away from reacting to a situation, or if we have to react to that situation, before we actually communicate that reaction, to take the time to calm down, that's really, really important. So I know with our anger management course, we talk a lot about going up anger mountains. So as soon as you are emotional about any situation, it elicits that fight or flight response, which means the stress levels go up, but the thinking levels go down. So when thinking goes down, you're not able to react or respond to a situation as clearly as you might be if you took the time to really kind of decipher what it is that you need to gain or get from that situation. So your second choice would be to respond to a situation. So it's task or problem solving focused, okay? Parties are aware of the potential for escalation, but whoever is engaging in that conflict, both parties want to keep that from escalating, which reacting to a situation will escalate, typically a conflict. So they're taking the time when you respond to think carefully about what is the best way to handle and problem solve this situation. So for me, oftentimes when I have a conflict, I try to think 3 to 4 steps ahead. So what is it I really need out of this situation? And what's the best way to get me from point A to point B, okay? Without a whole bunch of other of those reactions kind of in there. Because I know if I react emotionally, there's a good chance the person that I'm dealing with is also going to react emotionally as well, which is going to escalate that conflict or that situation. Does that make sense? All right, Jackie, anything to add there?
No, I think you hit the nail on the head there for sure. Making sure that kind of we're having that logical thought process is super important, and it can be super challenging for sure when you're kind of caught up in the moment. So that's why, again, we're going to iterate over and over again that this stuff does take practice, and it does take some patience to try it out before you're gonna nail it, right? So being committed and really putting the effort in is super important here as well.
Awesome. Okay, so what we're going to do now, and bear with us because this is one of the first times we've shown a video on one of our webinars, but we're going to show you about a 5-minute video on a movie called The Breakup. I just want to put out a bit of a trigger warning that it does cover some pretty deep content. It does actually show a conflict between 2 people, and it does use some foul language or not necessarily appropriate language. So I wanted to put that out there for everyone as well. So just bear with me while I get this up and going. Oh goodness, where did it go? Get right here.
Jess, I did notice on the sharing option too that you do have, it says optimize for full video clip sharing when you do share your screen there. So maybe give that a try.
All right. Okay, let's hope. Here we go.
Well, I'm gonna go do the dishes.
Cool.
It'd be nice if you helped me.
No problem. We'll get in a little bit later. I'm just gonna hit the streets here for a little bit.
Gary, come on. I don't want to do them later. Let's just do them now. Take 15 minutes.
Oh, honey, I am so exhausted. I just honestly want to relax for a little bit. If I could just sit here, let my food digest, and just try to enjoy the quiet for a little bit. Get some, get some, get some. That's what happens. And we will, we can clean the dishes tomorrow.
Gary, I don't like waking up to a dirty kitchen.
Who cares?
I care, all right? I care. I busted my ass all day cleaning this house and then cooking that meal, and I worked today. It would be nice if you said thank you and helped me with the dishes.
Fine. I'll help you do the damn dishes.
Oh, come on. You know what? No, that's not what I want.
You just said that you want me to help you do the dishes.
I want you to want to do the dishes.
Why would I want to do dishes? Why?
See, that's my whole point.
Let me see if I'm following this, okay? Are you telling me that you're upset because I don't have a strong desire to clean dishes?
No, I'm upset because you don't have a strong desire to offer to do the dishes.
I just did.
After I asked you.
Jesus, Brooke, you're acting crazy again.
Don't you call me crazy. I am not crazy.
I didn't call you crazy. I didn't call you crazy. No, I didn't. I said you're acting crazy.
You know what, Gary? I asked you to do one thing today, one very simple thing, to bring me 12 lemons, and you brought me 3.
God damn it. If I knew that it was going to be this much trouble, I would have brought home 24 lemons. Even 100 lemons. I know what I wish? I wish everyone that was at that goddamn table had their own little private bag of lemons.
Gary, it's not about the lemons.
So that's all you're talking about?
I'm just saying it'd be nice if you did things that I asked. It would be even nicer if you did things without me having to ask you.
Well, I do seem to remember doing something for you this morning without you asking.
Gary, come on.
I'm
you know what?
serious.
No, I'm
here.
serious. I
too.
really am. Come on, you knew I was working today and I made that meal, and you could have thought to yourself, you could have said, I think I'm going to get Brooke some flowers.
You said on our very first date that you don't like flowers, that they're a waste of money.
Every girl likes flowers, Gary.
You say that you don't like flowers. I'm supposed to take that to mean that you do like flowers?
No, this is not about, you're not getting it. You're not getting this, Gary. Okay, it's not about the lemons. It's not about the flowers. It's not about the dishes. It's just, how many times do I have to drop hints about the ballet?
You know I can't Brooke, come here. We talked about the damn ballet. I hate the goddamn ballet. You got a bunch of dudes in tights flopping around for 3 hours. It's like a medieval techno show. It's a nightmare. I sit there in the sweat. The whole thing. I do. Wondering when the hell's the goddamn nightmare gonna end? Go to a damn ballet.
It's not about you loving the ballet, Gary. It's about the person that you love loves the ballet, and you want to spend time with that person.
Not when they're at the ballet?
Okay, forget the ballet. Forget the ballet. We don't go anywhere together.
We just went to Ann Arbor together.
To Ann Arbor. To the Michigan Notre Dame game. You think screaming drunk kids and leprechauns doing backflips, that's fun. That's fun for me. Come on, man. I did that for you. How do you show up for me?
I'm up on the bus every goddamn day for you.
Come on.
I'm busting my ass to be the best tour guide in the damn city so I can make enough money to support both of us, and hopefully you won't have to work one day.
I want to work.
All I ask, Brooke, is that you show a little bit of appreciation, that I just get 20 minutes to relax when I come home instead of being attacked with questions and nag the whole damn thing.
You think that I nag you?
That's all you do! All you do is nag me. The bathroom's a mess. Your belt doesn't match. Hey, Gary, you should probably go work out. Nothing I ever do is ever good enough. I just want to be left the hell alone.
Really? Is that what you want, Gary? Is that what you want?
Yeah.
That's what you want?
Yeah.
Fine, great. Do whatever the hell you want. You leave your socks all over this house, dress like a pig, play your stupid-ass video game. I don't care. I'm done.
What?
I am done. I don't deserve this. I really do not deserve this. I deserve somebody who gives a shit. I'm not spending one more second of this life with some inconsiderate prick. You're a prick.
Everybody still with me? That work okay? Yeah? All right. So while Jackie gets her screen up again, let's talk a little bit about what we just seen. I'm going to talk a little bit about that respond versus react, which you could see very clearly there. Emotions were extremely high. You could see aggression come out on both sides, saying things that were intentionally meant to hurt people without actually trying to resolve the actual conflict. What I find interesting is that after watching that, and we use this several times in this course, and we come up with the same thing, is that I don't really know what the actual argument was about, right? Which I find quite interesting. They went over 4, 5, 6, 7 different topics in the matter of 4 minutes. And this can be really typical for a lot of different conflicts, right? And a lot of that has to do with a lot of issues that have maybe gone unresolved, or that reacting versus actually responding to a situation and taking the time to kind of pick apart each situation one by one, being very specific, which we talked about with the desk script, and dealing with that particular conflict. Jackie?
No, I think you hit the nail on the head there again. Basically, when we were talking about that desk script, we talked on Monday about making sure that we're focusing in on that one issue, right? And we saw, like, I don't know how many different instances they're happening. So being able to be specific is super key to getting those effective outcomes that are going to actually remedy what the issue is. So we definitely, we kind of talked a little bit about this on Monday about first seeking to understand and then be understood, right? And this one is kind of just another kind of overview, right? Of we want to make sure that we're responding, not reacting, that we're taking the time to listen before we just jump in and talk, and that we're actually thinking about things before we jump to assumptions or what we think the other person might be thinking about, right? So as we kind of keep rolling here, let's get into talking a little bit about competitive and collaborative communication. So I'm going to open the chat box here, and I just want you all just to, if you think of the word competitive, what are some words that kind of come to mind when you think of competition or competitive? To win, yeah. Win again. Winning an argument, yeah. Anything else that needs to pop in there? Typically, when we're thinking of a competitive, we're thinking about probably 2 parties or something coming up that coming to kind of a head where you have a goal, and typically that is to beat the other person or the other opponent, or to play to win, right? Maybe it's to teach a lesson that just kind of popped in there, right? It's really kind of that one track mind of, I'm going to do this to eventually get to this outcome. Being right, that's another one that popped in there, right? You can even sometimes leave some of your positions aside, and you'll just focus on why you're right no matter what, even if maybe you're not right all of the time, right? So that's kind of a quick overview. And then let's switch gears a little bit. What kind of words come to mind when you think of collaborative or collaboration, those types of things? Let's pop those in the chat box there. A team, yeah, absolutely. Being flexible, for sure. It's a win-win situation, definitely. So when we think of kind of that collaborative approach, we're looking at more so of all parties involved, making sure that everyone's able to have their thoughts and opinions heard there. Team was my answer to things, Leanne. But yeah, so that whole group approach, right? Making sure that we're working towards the common goal here. So I'm going to pop in these kind of statements here. So when we're talking about the competitive model, and we're going to be elaborating on the collaborative model a little bit here. But we're talking about the competitive model, we're kind of immediately seeking to find a solution, and there's usually less understanding on how parties are truly affected, right? As I said, it's kind of that one track. We're going to just immediately jump from problem to solution, right? We're not really looking at what's in between. Whereas when we're talking about the collaborative model, we're ideally trying to take the time to examine kind of underlying motivations or feelings, and the interests of all parties are being brought to the forefront and are involved in basically determining what that ultimate solution is going to be. Both of these models definitely do have a time and a place, right? And there's positives and negatives to both of them. When we think of kind of a crisis or a problem, what kind of model do you think we kind of naturally revert to? I'm going to open my chat again because it seems to be keeps hiding on me here. Oh, and it's not showing up. Jess, do you see anything in the chat box? Competitive. I hope I read your lips right because you're muted. That's okay.
Sorry, combative.
Perfect. So when we're usually dealing with this, like an issue or a crisis or something, we automatically kind of go to immediately seeking to find a solution, right? Because we don't necessarily have the time to dig into all of those kind of underlying feelings, motivators, emotions, those types of things. So that can be a positive to kind of the utilization of that model. When we're talking about effective communication, we really want to try our best to, if at all possible, really focus on this collaborative communication approach, right? So this is when we're really focusing on those interests. And we've mentioned that many, many times so far, and we're going to dig into that a little bit more as we go here. But this collaborative model really kind of encourages honesty and respect for one another through kind of communicating, and openness to find the best solution that's going to work for all of the parties that are involved, right? So not immediately dismissing one person's opinions or thoughts, really trying to incorporate all the aspects of everyone that's involved in that situation to get to the best outcome there. So with that being said, we're going to talk a little bit about interest-based communication using that collaborative communication model. So there's kind of the 4 steps here, and we'll dig into these a little bit as we go. Really, the first thing that we really want to identify is obviously that issue, and this is commonplace when we were talking about the desk script or those I statements, and all of those tools can kind of be utilized within this this approach here, right? So when we're identifying the issue and opening, we want to make sure again that the issue is being stated clearly. And this model is hopefully going to allow for the other parties that are involved to openly share as well. As Jess mentioned earlier, it can be challenging sometimes when you're trying to put the effort in to have effective communication, the other party's just not hearing it. By kind of going through this, hopefully it sets that tone of openness to communicate and encourages the other person to want to communicate as well. And just taking a quick step back here, this model is not necessarily going to mean that it's all going to be sunshine and rainbows at the end of the day. And when we kind of get to that agreement part, it might not necessarily be that both parties agree, but there can be that agreement to disagree. And as long as those issues are identified and those interests are put out on the table, you're going to be further ahead for those kind of personal relationships as well. So kind of jumping back to that opening and that identifying of issues, making sure that, again, we're not bringing up the past, we're not putting 17 issues all into this one kind of discussion, and having that openness and calm tone is super important. Here, you're also going to want to discuss some boundaries, right? So making sure that you're not going to be bringing up something that maybe you've disagreed on many, many times in the past, right? So staying focused on what you're actually hoping to resolve and or just discuss further. When we talk about identifying issues, this is really where kind of the bulk of the conversation should be had, right? When we talk about positions versus interests, this is again where we're going to kind of come back to that iceberg model that I mentioned earlier. When we talk about a position, this is really kind of the point of view or the stance that someone takes on something. What's kind of underlying that is all of the different interests and desires, concerns, fears, those types of things that are going to kind of be the root of why they've come to the decision that they have. So being able to fully understand more of those interests and all of the different components that might be working together to have that person come to that decision or that position, that's what we need to dig into. So we can actually kind of resolve and learn a little bit more about what those pieces are and understand more fully before we try and seek a solution. So when we talk about interest, there can be a variety of different things, and this is again where we can use some of those I statements, open-ended questions, even that desk script, some of those components of that can kind of come into play here. But this is where you really want to dig into things like hopes and values, concerns, fears, expectations, priorities, beliefs. All of these types of things can kind of be explored a little bit further to better understand why someone has actually reached the decision that they have, right? Maybe my position is that I dislike my partner for the fact that he doesn't take the garbage out, right? But my concern is we live in a rural area. If that garbage doesn't get picked up, we're going to have rodents breaking into our shed, or the neighbor's dog is always getting into it, right? That's a concern that I need to express more so than just, you never take the garbage out, right? So understanding a little bit more about what those interests are is really going to allow you to kind of reach the solutions more effectively, rather than just kind of sticking with two positions and going head to head for however many days or however long that kind of argument might last, right? This is, again, like I said, where the majority of your conversation should be happening. We tend to often want to jump to finding solutions right away. But when you do that, kind of a tip that I like to share is, if you have that opportunity to explore a solution, jump back and look at those interests a little bit further. Do that a couple times to make sure that you're fully exploring what all of those different interests are from all of the parties involved, and only move on to kind of the solution and the kind of closing of a conversation once you feel that everyone has been heard, right? So it's not just my interests that are being brought up to the table, but it's my spouse's as well. So making sure that we have that back and forth is super important here. Anything you want to add, Jess, before I jump to the next two steps? Good to go? All right, so kind of that brainstorming solutions piece. So this is, again, like I said, where we tend to want to jump to right away, right? Generally, myself included, I'm kind of a fix-it type person, right? I'm going to hear of a problem and immediately be like, okay, we got this, we'll figure it out. This is how it's going to be. Let's go and do it, right? So ABC and execute, like we just go straight to the solution. And this can be a challenge for a lot of people. And we tend to jump from 1 to 3 and we miss that interest piece, which is really where we're going to build and those relationships and be a little bit more open with the people involved, right? But the main thing here is that we want to maximize the number of solutions that we can put on the table. So based on all of those interests that we've kind of brought up, what are all of the different solutions that we might be able to put out there? How can we ensure that we're going to achieve those, right? So building in some of those backup plans can be part of this process as well, right? Ultimately, we're looking at evaluating what's going to be the best solution based on all of the concerns and all of the interests that we've talked a little bit about before. The last piece here is that kind of agreement. And like I said earlier, this can not necessarily be like okay, yes, we both agree to do this, but this can be where compromises happen, right? So agreements for a solution moving forward based on what those brainstormed ideas were. So again, making sure that you kind of close the conversation with very clear the who, what, when, why, and hows, right? So making sure that everyone is fully aware of what they're agreeing to and that there's no gray area or room for interpretation, which can be another source of conflict, right? So here we're making sure that it's very specific. And if it comes to it, sometimes writing things down, right? Making some written agreements or verbal agreements that you're going to be able to stick to. This is where we kind of wrap things up and you're able to kind of move forward and where there should be that mutual respect after this conversation for both parties that have been involved, right? You don't want to be dwelling on something or feel as though you didn't get to have your one point voice because the other person wasn't letting you. If that's the case, you have to jump back again to that identifying those interests section and dig into that a little bit more. Like we've said with everything, this is a lot easier said than done, and putting it in 4 steps makes it sound, oh, super simple. But this is very challenging, and a lot of us do have a hard time, myself included, getting into that interest piece. As we talked about earlier, that's where that vulnerability lies, right? That's where you really are getting into those feelings and that yucky stuff that we sometimes don't like to explore too often, right? But if you're able to kind of work through these different steps and really focus on that interest-based piece of having a conversation, you'll be so much further ahead because you'll be learning about the other parties, where they're coming from, making sure that you understand before you seek to be understood, right? So that's kind of the interest-based communication model. And it does take practice and it does take time, but hopefully there are a few pieces in there that you can kind of take and try and kind of hopefully remedy a conflict a little bit better, kind of using these 4 steps moving forward.
Hey, Jackie.
Yeah.
I think one of my best or one of my favorite examples of the interest-based communication model is when you have to shop for a new vehicle. Right? So if the issue itself is we need a new vehicle, typically, especially if it's a household, there's a lot of different opinions in what that new vehicle might look like, right? Especially a one vehicle household. So maybe one party wants a truck for all of those really cool truck reasons. And then the other party wants a minivan for all of those cool minivan reasons. And it's how do you come to that agreement, right? So when we get into that identifying interest piece, it's all about the whys, right? So like if we're going to take those 2 examples, a truck is great for picking up things. It has 4-wheel drive. It's safe on the road. It's good in the winter. If we go to the minivan, maybe we have it's safe on the road. I can pick up things. I can hold more people and that kind of stuff. And it's about identifying those interests and then finding which ones are common. So like you have safety, you have better on the road than a car, you have like able to pick up and move things if necessary. So when you start looking at those interests that are common and you start brainstorming, it's a natural thing. I mean, this one's an easy one, SUV, right? Because it's A, B, C, and D. You come up with some of those brainstorming solutions. That way everyone feels like they have that input, and that's how those agreements tend to last longer and not have that resentment come in at the end.
Right.
So
and that's a super important part of that agreement piece, right? Is that you don't want to be holding on to any of those resentments or just accepting the situation because the other person spoke louder or the other person usually gets their way, right? Kind of going back to that passive versus aggressive kind of personalities there, right? So that's a perfect example for sure of trying to find those commonalities and making sure that both people feel like they're bringing equal parts to the solution.
And interestingly, and for those of you that know me, don't laugh right now, but I'm okay with not getting my way sometimes, as long as I feel like I'm heard and considered, right? And this model allows that to happen.
Definitely. Does anyone have any questions about interest-based communication, kind of using this model before we move forward onto the next or the last section here? I know it's a lot. Okay.
Okay, so listening, the other part of that communication equation, active listening is so important. And, oh, still digesting what I said. Perfect. Active listening is so important. And I did listen to you as you chatted into the chat box. I'm trying. I know we can all remember a time that we felt that we were trying to communicate something that was very important to us, but someone wasn't listening. And maybe that someone felt like they were listening, but they were still watching TV, or they were listening and they were still on their phone or on their computer or walking away. And sometimes I can be very guilty of this, and I try to explain what I'm doing while I'm doing it, but it doesn't necessarily excuse the fact I'm not really listening. So active listening in itself, it is a skill, and it's something that takes a lot of practice. It means that you're engaged in what that person is saying through your body language, through your tones, through the way you communicate back to that person. And it allows that person to feel safe and comfortable to open up, to talk about the things that are important to them. And it's also that opportunity to build trust. So interestingly enough, your communication, so if I'm trying to talk to you and you're on your phone and I'm trying to kind of bare my soul or be vulnerable or maybe even use some of those I statements and you're not listening to me, it's going to shut me down. So I'm going to pull away. And in those situations, it can definitely escalate conflict depending on what's going on. And it can also lead to kind of that distancing, which is something you don't want if you're trying to work towards a solution to a situation, right? So when we talk about active listening, there's a few different components to it. So Jackie, can you click the slide there? The components we want to talk about, how are we doing for time? Pretty good? Yeah. So empathetic listening, paraphrasing, summarizing, and reflection. So there's a really big difference between empathy and sympathy. And I'm going to try to show you a video in just a second that better explains that. But essentially, when we're active listening, we really want more of that empathetic listening. So what that means is the conscious attempt to acknowledge that the other person may be going through something that is really important to them. I know myself, I tend to be a fixer like Jackie. So if someone were to open up to me and tell me something that's, very vulnerable for them to say, my first reaction, okay, I want to fix it. How do we fix this? Right? And so empathetic listening for me personally can sometimes be a bit of a challenge. So bear with me. I'm going to try to show you a quick video on the difference between empathy and sympathy. I might have to get Jackie to, no, I think I can do it. Here we go. And then we'll talk about it after. So put this large screen.
So what is empathy, and why is it very different than sympathy? Empathy fuels connection. Sympathy drives disconnection. Empathy, it's very interesting. Teresa Wiseman is a nursing scholar who studied professions, very diverse professions where empathy is relevant, and came up with 4 qualities of empathy. Perspective taking, the ability to take the perspective of another person or recognize their perspective as their truth. Staying out of judgment, not easy when you enjoy it as much as most of us do. Recognizing emotion in other people and then communicating that. Empathy is feeling with people. And to me, I always think of empathy as this kind of sacred space when someone's kind of in a deep hole and they shout out from the bottom and they say, I'm stuck, it's dark, I'm overwhelmed. And then we look and we say, hey, you can climb down. I know what it's like down here, and you're not alone. Sympathy is, ooh, it's bad, no, you want a sandwich? Empathy is a choice, and it's a vulnerable choice, because in order to connect with you, I have to connect with something in myself that knows that feeling. Rarely, if ever, does an empathic response begin with at least. And we do it all the time, because you know what? Someone just shared something with us that's incredibly painful, and we're trying to silver lining it. I don't think that's a verb, but I'm using it as one. We're trying to put the silver lining around it. So I had a miscarriage. Oh, at least you know you can get pregnant. I think my marriage is falling apart. At least you have a marriage. John's getting kicked out of school. At least Sarah is an A student. But one of the things we do sometimes in the face of very difficult conversations is we try to make things better. If I share something with you that's very difficult, I'd rather you say, I don't even know what to say right now, I'm just so glad you told me. Because the truth is, rarely can a response make something better. What makes something better is connection.
All right, everyone was able to hear that? Uh-oh, it's going through again. Hold on. 1 second. There. Is that better? Okay, perfect. So there is a really big difference between empathy and sympathy. And one thing that I really connect with is that when someone shares something with me, I don't have to fix it. I just have to listen and kind of acknowledge the fact that whatever it is they're dealing with, it's frustrating or it's tough and it's a hard situation. And that's one of the tools that I personally connect with and have really had to challenge myself on when I am communicating with people. Paraphrasing is the next thing I wanted to review. So what paraphrasing is basically repeating words in your own language to let them know that you're listening, but also just to check in with the messages that are going back and forth. So what they're actually saying is what you're hearing. So maybe they're going to talk to you about a work situation and say something like, I can't get all this done. I just don't have enough time, and I'm really frustrated with my supervisor. And you listening to that might respond with something like, so what I hear you saying is, and this is a bit of summarizing as well, but what I hear you saying is your supervisor won't give you enough time to get this done. And maybe that person's going to come back and say, no, that's not what I meant. I feel like I run my own schedule, but my supervisor is frustrating me about something completely different. So that paraphrasing piece is really important to make sure that everybody is on the same page. Oftentimes, and I know this happens with people I communicate with quite a bit, sometimes we're even saying the same things just in a different way. And we'll go half an hour arguing the same points when we're actually like on the exact same page. And stopping for a second, checking in and doing that paraphrasing really lets you know that you're on the right track, and it moves towards a successful resolution of conflict, or helps to. Summarizing when it comes to active listening is where you go back through everything once the whole situation or that person is done kind of holding that talking stick, if you will, to say, okay, so what I hear you saying is, I have been ignoring you and you feel very frustrated and upset because you feel like you're doing more work around the house, and so on and so forth. So the major points of that conversation get reiterated, and you essentially ask that person if is that clear? Is that what you meant to say? If they say yes, then you are able to move forward from that. They feel understood. They feel like you've listened to their feelings. They feel like they're okay with maybe hearing what you have to say, or maybe moving towards a more of a resolution or brainstorming what solutions for whatever the conflict might be. When we talk about reflecting, that kind of pops into that summarizing piece as well. It's those emotions that you heard. And by reflecting on those, it can really help lead to diffusing those situations, especially if there's a buildup. You don't want resentment to come. You don't want to, and I notice in my life, and I'm sure we've all experienced it as well, typically, if you really don't feel like you get that resolution from conflict, that same conflict comes up over and over and over again. And I think when we watched the breakup, that was a really good example of that. So there was a lot of stuff that they were bringing into that conflict from the past that one partner didn't realize was even an issue, okay, but that other person hadn't resolved their feelings with it. So that reflection piece, that understanding piece about how each party feels is really, really important. Okay, so next slide, Jackie. So when it comes to active listening skills, I mean, there's a lot out there, and almost any communication or conflict course that I've seen talks about active listening because it is one of the most important skills when it comes to any type of communication. Here's some of our better tools when it comes to active listening. So making sure that you listen to understand what is being said, not to win conversations and not to make people understand you. Ask deeper questions that can sometimes be open-ended. So, I understand you're having a conflict with this situation. How does that make you feel? Right? So if you're not getting some of those feelings out, ask them, okay? And leave that open-ended, and don't just assume. So if they haven't said they feel frustrated, don't say you feel frustrated, okay? Let them tell you. You want to make sure that, especially if it's a very serious conversation or conflict, you avoid interruption. So make sure that you get rid of distractions that are in the room, whether it's a phone, a computer, a TV. Maybe you're dealing with the struggles of having everyone in your house full time, and you want to make sure that this conversation is heard and equal parties get to share. So maybe you're going to wait till kids go to bed or they're not in the area and that kind of thing. Whatever you can do to protect that conversation in space. Obviously, you want to make sure you're paying attention to whoever you're talking to, their nonverbal cues as well as what they're saying. So again, when we did that very first slide on Monday, only 8% of our communication is actually verbal, right? So really pay attention to how they're saying it, the tone that they're saying it with, and their body language as well. Slow down and practice silence. I love this one because silence is something I am terrible at. Right? So if there's silence, I'm usually trying to fill the silent space. And it's something that I've challenged myself with quite often, to be comfortable in that silence and wait for people to respond with their own feelings and own emotions instead of feeling like, or asking a question like, how does that make you feel? And then if they're silent for a second, I will come in with, do you feel happy? Do you feel sad? Like it seems like I would feel this way, and I just try to fill it, and it's not necessary. So try to really practice that silence if you can. Train your mind not to be distracted. This is something, again, I challenge myself with quite often, is that if I'm engaging in a conversation, I try to be there in my mind and my physical body, not just my physical body, thinking about other things, right? So I'm not thinking about what's on TV next or what I have to do tomorrow. I'm actually there and present, okay? And the last one we want to hit on is withhold judgment. So again, for problem solving, you want to keep that judgment down. You want to make sure that you're using a lot of the same tools and techniques that we've been talking about. Next slide.
Awesome. So as we look to kind of wrap things up here, I know that's a lot of info, and I'm looking at the time, we're a little bit over here, so we won't belabor it too much longer, but we just really want to iterate again how many resources there are available to us, particularly in this time where we might be needing to communicate a little bit more effectively, or might be struggling with a variety of different concerns that right now are very valid, right? And many of us can have a variety of different stressors that we need to kind of work out. So these are kind of a few of the resources that are available to us. So SIFMAP still available, Canada Suicide Hotline, they're working around the clock as well. Staying up to date on just kind of what's going on in terms of the whole virus situation. Really want to make sure that we're talking about credible information. So the Canada.ca website would be where we kind of recommend everyone heading to. Family information line, super helpful if you're dealing with concerns related to your family or your personal safety. A great resource as well. Sexual Misconduct Response Center as well. These are more specific for our CAF and D&D members, but a variety of great resources available as well. SMRC is available 24/7 as well, and they are bilingual to discuss any instances related to sexual misconduct or concerns related to that. And then finally on there, that kids help phone or being able to text for back and forth as well. Making sure that our kids have an outlet as well, or those kind of dependents that might be a bit younger. They have valid concerns, and if they may not feel comfortable speaking directly with you, there are a variety of different people who are well trained to be able to connect with them on a platform that they feel most comfortable with. So just a few of the resources that are available during this time. Obviously, we don't have access to as many as we normally do, kind of when we're in the office or on our bases and wings. But please feel free to kind of reach out. And as always, we're here as a resource as well. So if you do have any questions, please feel free to connect with our team to seek a little bit of assistance. Otherwise, we'll kind of wrap things up here for our communications course. We want to thank you all for participating and being a part of this for, what are we going on now? 3 or 4 weeks? I can't even keep track now of how long we've been trying. There we go, 4 weeks. So long. So thank you for bearing with us as we're working through this platform. We do have a variety of different courses that are coming up. So our calming techniques course, it's actually going to be tonight and every Wednesday at 8 o'clock. We have our mission nutrition program starting. So that course is, registration is required, but it will be Tuesday, Thursdays at 10 in the morning. We have our mental fitness series coming up, so exploring a little bit more about mental wellness and mental fitness. So that's next week, the 15th and 17th at 2 o'clock in the afternoon. And then our injury reduction course is going to be running on the 23rd at 7:30. As always, follow us on our variety of different channels, so YouTube, Facebook, and Instagram. There, all of the promotions will be up there. Otherwise, I think we've gone over enough time. Is there anything else, Jess, you wanted to add before we close things out here? Awesome. So if we're good to go, please feel free again, if you have any further questions, to reach out to one of us on our team. And hopefully we'll be seeing you soon in some of our upcoming programs. Thanks again, everyone, and have a good day.